What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 4 preview. So, going to go through some of the big questions and topics that you've put to me on Twitter and give you my opinion of what I think about them. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button as well if you are new around here and haven't done so already. It's completely free to do, takes 2 seconds, so why not? First question, first topic is whether or not to sell Erling Haaland. Quite a few questions about this. Do you think selling Haaland to Kane after Pep mentioned rotation is a good idea? Or would it be better to spread the money around? So you could sell him to someone like Ivan Toney, to Mitrovic instead, then use that money to either upgrade your defence if you're on a cheap one right now, or even put that money into midfield. So I've seen some people suggest that possibly you could get a second £8 million midfielder. Or should we do neither and just hold Haaland? So there's a few different ways to think about this question. If we come on to the quotes first of all, so this was what Fantasy Football Scout posted about what Pep said about Haaland. So he said last season he was talking about Haaland, didn't play 90 minutes because he was injured. The physios and doctors did an incredible job since he arrived to avoid injuries. Now he has 1 game a week. I tell you now, when we have games every 3 days that Erling will not play, I will play Julian Alvarez instead, basically. When we start with games every 3 days, everyone is going to play. So there's going to be rotation all around. Players like Walker are probably going to play 2 out of 3. And we might even see, if Ake is fit, him playing left back. We might see the new guy Gomez playing left back. We just don't know, but a lot of players are only going to play twice. It doesn't mean that every player will only play twice. Like Ederson's going to be fine. De Bruyne might play all 3, etc. But there is going to be some rotation. Pep has said himself, and we've all kind of been expecting it anyway. It's not just midweek Premier League games, there's also European matches and stuff like that. Now, whether or not to sell him, first of all, especially to Harry Kane in particular, is an interesting one. Now, on the left, I've got the date of when the game week starts. It's not necessarily the date of their match, but it's the date when the game week starts. And obviously, you can see that midweek game in Game Week 5 to Game Week 6, but there will be European matches as well. So this is just the dates for the Premier League Game Week deadlines. So one thing with Haaland is, the way the fixtures fall, I don't know if it's a good idea to get rid of him this week for Harry Kane. I know that Kane has Nottingham Forest away, which looks really good, but I don't think that Crystal Palace at home is that bad of a fixture for Man City. The way they've been playing, they could have scored a few more goals. They've already got 3 against Newcastle. Obviously, they got 4 against Bournemouth as well, scored in the first game week too. So I don't know if there's an out-and-out need to sell Haaland just to get Kane for Nottingham Forest. And I think the big thing for me is captaincy when you think about these questions, because in Game Week 4, you could, if you own Kane or Son, captain them. Nottingham Forest away is probably the best fixture you can get right now, aside from Nottingham Forest at home. And yes, okay, it's away, so it's not quite as good as being a home fixture, but getting to play Nottingham Forest is decent. But obviously, Salah has Bournemouth at home. So if we just assume that a lot of people are going to captain Salah this week, we can kind of forget about the fact Kane plays Nottingham Forest, because although he might be on paper slightly better than Haaland, it's not such a big factor because you're not going to captain either of them anyway. And I say you're not going to do that, right? I say many people are not going to do that. They're mostly going to captain Salah. So then you come on to Game Week 5, and suddenly Spurs have got West Ham away. Now, no one's going to sit here and tell me that's a better fixture than either Newcastle at home for Salah or Nottingham Forest at home for Haaland. Of course, the way the fixtures fall, that could be the game where Haaland gets rotated, only comes on maybe for 20, 30 minutes towards the end of the game, and then he's back for Aston Villa. So it's not ideal, but right now, I don't know if I want to run the risk of just him missing that Nottingham Forest game. I think the idea of rotation will probably put me off from captaining him, but I think Salah against Newcastle at home is a perfectly good captain anyway. So that's probably what I will do, and just hold Haaland and hope that he starts, because if he does, there could be a lot of goals in that game. And then it might actually be from Game Week 6 that I actually look to make the move, because by then we'll have known whether he's been rotated, and if he has, there's probably a good chance he starts in Game Week 6. If he hasn't been rotated against Palace or Forest, that might be the week to switch to Kane, because Kane has Fulham at home, or you could move the money to Son if you wanted to in midfield. Depends what your structure is and transfers are like, but you could go to Kane in Game Week 6 and maybe even captain him ahead of Salah against Everton away. I think both are good options for what it's worth. And then that's when you make the move. I think for me, if the fixtures fell the other way, so if Haaland had Nottingham Forest this week, then Palace, and then Spurs had West Ham this week, and then Nottingham Forest in game week 5, followed by Fulham, I would almost certainly make the move in game week 5. But the way the fixtures fall, I just don't think I'm going to do it. I'm going to hold on to him. And I think, as we've seen over the last couple of weeks, as long as Foden at some point passes the ball, Haaland is going to score more points. Even though all those touches and stuff that he had against Bournemouth was talked about, he looked a menace against Newcastle and could have had more points. So just to come back to the question, I don't think selling Haaland to Kane is bad. For what it's worth, I think that Kane's expected minutes over the next 3 games will definitely be better than Haaland. We expect him to be on the pitch more often than not. That's not going to be the same for a Man City player. But for all the reasons I've just discussed, I don't think I'm going to do it right away. If you had 2 free transfers this week, you could use that to justify the move. But if you've got something else to do instead, I would maybe look at that and not go for it. Just quickly on the whether or not it's a good idea to spread that money around, I think that depends just how much money you've got around your team and how easy it would then be to switch back. Because if you go to like Tony, then you upgrade a midfielder, then maybe you've got $500,000 or $1 million left over and you use that on a different move the week after. If you suddenly then want to get back to Son or De Bruyne or Kane or Haaland, it's going to take a lot of transfers to get back. And I know people will say, well, I've just got the wild card, I'll use that as and when. But you don't want to be forced into using that if you don't need to be. So I don't know if I'd spread the money around. I don't really know what it would gain me right now. Like for my team, for example, let's say I did Haaland to Tony, that would free up like 4 million. Then I could maybe use that to upgrade Martinelli to like a Sterling. But do I really want to do that the way Martinelli's playing? I've already got a lot of expensive defenders. So until there's a need for the money, I don't think we need to be worrying about it. I don't think it's necessarily a bad suggestion at all. You could get another £8 million midfielder, for example, maybe drop one of your defenders and play 4-4-2 and have Tony, second 8 million, and obviously have your good defence. But I don't think there's an absolute must need to do that. So ultimately, to summarise, I'm probably not going to do Haaland to Kane. I think there is some merit in it, but probably not enough just because of the way the fixtures fall. So there were quite a few questions about wildcard. I'm going to go through some general thoughts, how you might decide whether you need to wildcard this week, and also go through my team and show you what changes that I would make in a second. This specific question was, is an early wildcard viable to jump ahead and get 3 up top, so 3 forwards, and move money out of the backline? Now, as I said in the team selection video yesterday, I think this idea that some people have, not everyone, that big at the back is now dead and we've got to put more money into midfield or more money up front and have those 3 spots is kind of nonsense, to be honest with you, because nobody was really saying that after game week 2. All of a sudden a few teams blank, and now after game week 3 we've got to get rid of that big at the back and we've got to move that money up front instead. And I've said this before in other videos, most of you have already got 2 players up front, so you're just using a wild card potentially in some cases just to get a third one. Are you 100% sure that third forward is definitely better than those defenders you've got in your defence? You might be right, and maybe they are, in which case go for it. But these are the things that I would think about. So I put some general thoughts down. How confident are you that you have things wrong with your current team? So you're looking at that team and you're thinking it needs a wild card, but how confident are you that you can make the changes needed to kind of warrant a wild card? I will say, and this comes on to a point I'm going to talk about in a minute, you're probably never going to absolutely need a wildcard. There's never going to be a point where you have to make 7 to 8 changes anyway. So it might be that this week is good for you. And for some people, they will need a wildcard. They will have a team that just isn't working. They're missing out on too many price rises. They don't want to get left behind. That's absolutely fair. But I would suggest if you've got 3 Arsenal, 3 Liverpool, the rest of your team is made up with 1 or 2 Man City, Spurs and Chelsea players, and then possibly some of you have got like Rodrigo or Tony and players like that thrown in, you're probably okay. You probably don't need to panic. You've got a 4.5 million goalkeeper. That's absolutely fine. So don't feel the need to have to go and do it. But on the flip side, there's nothing wrong with using it early if you need to. Again, the unlimited transfers to the World Cup means that an early wild card is more viable than it probably has been over the last few seasons. Second question, if Chelsea and or Man City had kept a clean sheet in game week 3, would you feel different about your team? I think a lot of people would. And I do want to stress that. I think because Chelsea, Man City and Liverpool all didn't get clean sheets in game week 3, suddenly that big at the back looks weak. And obviously at the same time, lots of attackers did well. But if they kept a clean sheet, would you feel different? Because them not keeping a clean sheet in game week 3 doesn't really affect what's going to happen in game week 4. So if you thought they were good picks for game week 3, 4 and 5, they're still good picks. They just happen to not get a clean sheet in game week 3. And these things can happen. Players are not... I tweeted this right at the start of the season. Every year, people are surprised when their players don't score points and other people's players do, that will happen all throughout the season. You've got to be prepared for that. It's also unlikely you'll have, this is kind of what I was saying originally, it's very unlikely you'll ever have a team where the wild card is absolutely essential. You're always managing it. You're always getting players in with good fixtures. You're always removing players with injuries and suspensions. Gone are the days where you're going to wildcard and change like 8 to 9 players. So if you just want to change 3 to 4 core players and you really think they can make a difference over the next 4 to 5 game weeks, then yeah, maybe it is worth wildcard. And that's all going to depend on your own team. Where I'm looking right now is probably game weeks 8 to 12. I did talk about this in a previous game week preview video. That is because that is the period at the start of the season, or in the first half of the season, where the likes of Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, Spurs, etc., they all have some bad fixtures at least. It doesn't mean that game weeks 8 to 12 are awful for all of them, but they start to have a few bad fixtures. And so either wildcarding early between 8 and 9 when the international break is, potentially removing some of those big players and spreading funds around for different teams, different players, could be the way, and then use transfers to get them back. Or during that period, you transfer them out and then look to wildcard them back in later on. Now, some people will say, why would you wildcard in game weeks 11 or 12 when after game week 16 we get unlimited transfers? But wildcarding with 5 game weeks in mind and just absolutely maximising points for that period is not necessarily a bad thing, especially when most of us are going to be able to manage our team up until game weeks 8, 9, 10 anyway. So that's kind of where I'm looking right now. You've also got the potential to do something a little bit interesting with a late wildcard, potentially bench boosting. So if you wildcarded around game week 12 to set up for a bench boost. Now, I've not looked into it. I don't know if it's definitely possible. But let's say you bench boosted sometime after that before the World Cup. You could then restructure your bench afterwards with those unlimited transfers. So I actually quite like the idea of a late wildcard, even though I know that an early wildcard is also viable. I just don't think I need it. When I look at my team, I genuinely think if I was wildcarding this week, and let's forget about, changing Greenwood to a different 4.5, changing Reed to a different 4.5. If we just look at the first 11, I genuinely think I'd make 3 changes, okay? And I think they would be these. I think I would reverse Ederson back to Sanchez. So I did that move last week. I'd probably reverse it. I probably would take Cucurella. I don't think he's a bad pick. I don't think we need to wildcard to get rid of him. But if I was wildcard, I'd probably do that. And I'd probably get in Emerson, who hopefully has been moved. Yeah, £4 million defender. And then I would swap Reed for a 6.5 million midfielder. Probably anyway. I could go 3 up front, but I'd probably change him for a midfielder like Rodrigo. And that's it. 3 moves. That's not worth a wild card. Am I 100% sure that Cucurella and Ederson are worse picks than having Rodrigo in there and Emerson? Obviously, Emerson would be benched, and I would just play Rodrigo every week. Am I 100% sure of that? Not really. And like I said, I could do Greenwood to a 6.54, but I think Mitrovic has already gone up anyway. So it's not, for me, it's not even possible. For some of you, it will be, depending on the money you've got. And obviously, I could wildcard other players out. I could swap Gabriel to Saliba to make up the money. I could swap Haaland to Kane to make up the money. But then I would just be potentially making moves just to kind of justify using the wild card in the first place. So for my team, if I'm only making 3 changes, that tells me that team is pretty good, no matter what happened in game week 3, and therefore I don't need it. So these are the kind of points I would think about if you're thinking of using the wildcard. I don't want to talk anyone into it or out of it. Your team might need it, but for a lot of you, I just don't think it's needed this week, even if you've got big at the back. So every week there's a question about £8 million midfielders, but I like this one. It's a little bit different and not really something that I've considered. I've always thought if I sell Luis Diaz, it'll be to a different £8 million midfielder, but of course I could just downgrade him as well and use that money elsewhere. So with how the £8 million midfielders are performing, is switching them out for one of the Leeds midfielders with an international break wildcard on the cards a bad shout? So essentially, you take your £8 million midfielder, you sell them for a Leeds midfielder. I'm going to assume for most people it's going to be Rodrigo. He's the guy with 5 returns in 3. And then maybe you use that money elsewhere. And if you need to reverse it or change it or play around with your structure, you do that between game weeks 8 and 9 when the international break is, and you hit that wildcard button. So is that something that we should be looking at doing? For me, I would not do it in game week 4 unless I desperately need that money for another move. The reason for that is Leeds play Brighton away, and I don't think that's that easy of a fixture, and I think their really good run starts after that in game week 5, and obviously then even if it's a short-term move, you could change them on wildcard. But alongside that, most of the £8 million midfielders outside of Maddison, who plays Chelsea away, all have good fixtures this week. So Bournemouth at home for Diaz, you got Fulham at home for Saka. Obviously Mason Mount's got Leicester at home. I know he's not done much so far, but it's a good fixture. Foden's got Palace at home, which is perfectly okay. And obviously you've got Kulusevski against Nottingham Forest as well. So I'd probably back all of them this week over Rodrigo, despite the form that he's in. From game week 5, you could definitely look at it, but I would still want a way to spend that money. Now, we can fall into the trap sometimes of only ever playing the player that's more expensive because we just assume they're going to score more points, which is often the case, but not always. But I don't know if I've seen enough so far to say that the £8 million mids are underperforming. There's definitely some issues there. Mason Mount, I don't think, has looked fantastic. Things can change very quickly, but hasn't looked fantastic so far. But the fixtures are still pretty good. So I don't know if you need to rush out to move him on, even though he's dropped in price. We'll talk about him in a minute, I'm sure. Luis Diaz, I think he looked good in game week 1. I think he looked pretty good against Man United as well. Got his goal against Crystal Palace. Has got good fixtures coming up. I don't know if I'll be prepared to sit here and say that Rodrigo is definitely a better option than him moving forward. Now, obviously, it's a different conversation. If it's Rodrigo plus money that can make a big upgrade elsewhere, then it might be worth it. But if it's just a straight shootout between the £8 million midfielders and Rodrigo, I still think I'd just hold the £8 million midfielder, maybe save a transfer and then reassess in a few game weeks' time. So it's not bad thinking if you think Leeds can keep this up, but I'd really want a way to spend that money before I do it, and I just don't think I would do it in game week 4 either way. So we'll stick to £8 million midfielders for just a second. There were quite a few questions about Mount. So what do we do with a lad called Mason Mount? Stick for one more week or twist and sell him? And I know why people are looking to get rid. It has been frustrating. No return so far. I would say that front line of kind of Sterling, Havertz and Mount hasn't really clicked yet. They maybe could have got something a little bit more against Spurs in terms of goals. Not really against Everton. Obviously, the Leeds game just didn't go quite as planned at all. But I think they do have the fixtures going forward to get a few more goals. I guess there's maybe some worries because last year often we saw the defenders chipping in with the goals and assists, and that's kind of how they got some of their points. But Mason Mount himself got 11 goals, 11 assists last year. There's nothing to say that he can't do similar this year. And like I said, they've definitely got the fixtures to possibly make that happen. So if you look at the next few, Leicester at home and Southampton away, they are two fixtures that I would be looking to target. Okay, West Ham at home maybe not quite as easy, but Fulham away is pretty decent as well. And if you've already eaten that price drop, so if you had him at 8 million and he's gone down to 7.9, there's not really any of the other £8 million midfielders you can even swap to. Foden, Diaz, Maddison, Kulusevski and Bowen, who were all in and around that 8 to 8.5, are all more expensive now. So unless you got money in the bank, you can't move there anyway. And even if you had money in the bank, I don't know if that is a move I would make this week unless I had 2 free transfers. Like Mason Mount to Kulusevski or Luis Diaz potentially for the fixture they have this week could be an option if you've got a bit of money in the bank. But I don't think it's something that I would go out of my way to try and find the money for, if that makes sense. And if you wanted to straight swap, you're looking at Mahrez, who we don't even know if he's going to start. Saka, who's got Fulham at home. But again, is Saka, the way he's played so far, definitely better than Mason Mount against Leicester at home? I don't think he is. So for me, I think if you've got one free transfer, he's actually quite an easy hold this week. I think the fixture is good enough to give him one more chance. And let's be honest, when we think about the £8 million mids, our expectations are probably a little bit higher than they should be. Yes, there's cheaper players like Martinelli and Rodrigo, Ivan Toney that in some ways are performing better. But at some point, they are going to start getting consistent returns. I've got no doubts about that whatsoever. And it could start from this week, Leicester at home and Southampton away. So I wouldn't go out of my way to do it. It kind of goes back to that other question about Leeds midfielders, right? If you can do something with the money from a downgrade, maybe to Gundogan, maybe to, like even Zaha, for example, I would want to wait until this Man City away fixture's out of the way and then maybe look at doing it from game week 5. Even then, Crystal Palace's fixtures aren't great, but Zaha is playing really well, and so are Crystal Palace in general. You could do one of these downgrade moves, maybe to a Rodrigo, maybe to a Rashford, maybe all the way down to a Gross if you really want to save some money. But again, I'd want to be making good use of that money in a different move. And if I'm not, I'd probably just hold on to Mason Mount. So I know it's easy. You can kind of get trapped holding on to players because they've got good fixtures. But I think you need a real good reason to move. And unless you definitely think that Kulusevski or Luis Diaz are much better options going forward and you've got money in the bank, I'd probably just hold Mason Mount, to be honest with you. So this question's about captains, but it could be about general players as well. So is it worth going for differential captains or differential players early in the season to try and boost overall rank? Now, ultimately, the answer for the most part is no. You should not be taking into account ownership. You should only be going for the players that are going to score you the most points. I'm not saying at no point during the season, whether it's early or late, can you not think about these things. But ultimately, you should be picking players to get you the most points. Now, later on in the season, wherever my overall rank is, I will probably have an aim that's a little bit higher, and I might choose differential captains or players to try and boost my rank, because at that point there's less and less weeks to be able to do it. You might get to game weeks 4, 5 or 6 or whenever it might be, you might have 2 captains that you genuinely cannot split, and depending on the type of manager you are, you might go for the one that's higher owned to kind of save your rank, or you might go for the one that's lower owned in the hope to get a bit of a boost, right? There's nothing wrong with doing that. But for the most part, you're just trying to maximise points, not worry about who's owned by who. So this week for me, I'm probably going to captain Salah against Bournemouth at home. Is he a differential in my team? Absolutely not. He'll probably be the highest owned player when you include captaincy. But I don't care, because I think he's the one in my team that's going to score the most. And the reason that I wouldn't worry too much about overall rank right now is the points are quite tightly packed, and also a lot of people that are leading might have already used chips and stuff like that, and if you haven't, you've got a chance later in the season to catch up with them anyway. So this is from livefpl.net. check out that website if you haven't already. Completely free website, very handy for a lot of FPL stuff. My rank is 455k, so on the right it tells me how far behind or ahead I am of certain ranks. So if I had 8 fewer points than I do right now, just 8, this isn't a lot, I'd be ranked a millionth instead of 455,000. On the flip side, if I had 12 more points, I'd be ranked 100k. So that is not much in it, right? And if you look at my team, okay, lots of these players are highly owned. Lots of people will say it's the template, it's a bad thing. But Luis Diaz's ownership, 21.5%. Cucurella's ownership, 11.5%. Is it 11.5? 11.1. If those two this week did really well, let's say they got 16 points between them, 8 each, that'd be pretty good. That would help me get up the ranks while the rest of my template players don't do as much. And all of a sudden, I'm not going to work out the exact maths because I'll definitely get it wrong, but I'd probably be a little bit closer to that top 100k. And that's just after one game week. So the idea that we need to start worrying about where we are in the overall ranks right now is not something I would consider. Look, maybe if you're 9 millionth or something and things just aren't going well, possibly, and I wouldn't even say you need to do something different, but you might need to wildcard and mix your team up or something like that. But you don't need to start making like worse picks just because they're lower owned. So if you genuinely think a lower owned player is better than Salah captain this week, then yes, you should absolutely go for them. But if you think that they are, and I'll come on to next week, if you think that Salah is the best pick out of your team, you should just go for him. That's it. So to come back to the original question, is it worth going for differential captains? It might be at times, but for the most part, you're just trying to maximise points, which I know sounds simple, but we try and complicate it a lot. So this question is about Man United players and when they might become viable. To be honest with you, I'm being a little bit cautious about Man United for a few different reasons. So in that Liverpool game, they did play really well. Even the most die-hard anti-Man United fan can probably agree with that. Yes, okay, we can look at Liverpool. Matip and Konate were out injured. Obviously, Fabinho didn't start. No Thiago. Nunez was suspended, right? So it was probably a weakened team than what we'd usually expect from them. But Man United, we can still agree that played well too. So that's a good thing. And the first goal was well worked. It wasn't necessarily on the counter, in behind the high line. Sancho very composed. But we've seen these kind of performances before against the likes of maybe a Liverpool or a Man City under Solskjaer. And then when they move to a game where they've got a lot of possession, they struggle with what to do with it. And that kind of still worries me going forward. Like, has Ten Hag had enough time to get them playing how he wants to play? When they've got the ball, can they create opportunity after opportunity? So that's one slight worry I have. The other one is kind of rotation, to be honest with you, because if you look at the fixtures for Man United, the next two from an attacking perspective are pretty good, right? Okay, it'd be better if at least one of them was at home, but Southampton and Leicester are both defences you can target. But after that, Arsenal at home, Palace away, Man City away, they're not that great. So unless you're going for a very short-term punt, Southampton away and Leicester away, I don't think they're necessarily ideal. But I think there could be rotation quite a lot as well. I think Ten Hag now, a lot of people are thinking that his back four is definitely going to be Dalot, Varane, Martinez and Malacia just because of how well they did against Liverpool. But in games where he's expecting to have more possession, he still might prefer, and I know people are going to laugh, but he might prefer Harry Maguire over Varane because he is better on the ball. He's going to make those forward passes in a better way than Varane does. And obviously, from a defensive point of view, Varane is much better. We saw that against Liverpool. He's more of a leader, gets the defence organised and stuff like that. But there will probably be games where Maguire plays as well. So I wouldn't even know who to go for in that defence because Malacia 4.4 could be a nice option going forward, but Luke Shaw might play at some point as well. To be honest, right now, Dalot is probably still the best defender, but I think although Man United players don't take up a huge amount of your budget, so in some ways they are risk-free if you don't go for like a Fernandes or a Ronaldo, they still take up a slot. So if you're someone with like Reece James, Cancelo, Trent and another defender with a 4 at the back, do you really want to put Dalot in there instead? Probably not. So then you move to the attack. I think Rashford at 6.3 million is definitely competition for someone like Rodrigo, for example. But the transfer window is not shut. They are still apparently in for Anthony at Ajax, maybe Gakpo as well. If those two come in, there's suddenly a lot of competition for those front three spots. We saw Elanga, Rashford and Sancho start against Liverpool, but then Martial came on at half-time. You'd expect him to play number 9 more often. So if they get another player that comes in on the right, you've suddenly got Elanga, Rashford and Sancho that could all play on the left. So I think the idea that Rashford is completely nailed on moving forward is not necessarily true either. And look, Martial might get the number 9 spot more often than not, but if Ronaldo doesn't go, he's surely going to get some minutes too. I just don't see him rotting on the bench for the rest of the season, even if he's not a great option for Man United from a non-FPL point of view. So for me, there is just too much up in the air. They are potentially very good value, but they are not such good value that we need to start. I don't even want to say wasting spots. I'm going to say using spots because there's so many other good options right now. So I'm confident that Ten Hag will make them good FPL options. I'm just not sure it's right now. So there we go, that is it for the Game Week 4 preview. Hopefully you enjoyed it and found it useful. If you did, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button if you are new around here. Let me know in the comments below if you've got any other questions. If you disagree or agree with anything that I've said, leave a comment below and I'll try and get back to as many as possible. Tomorrow I'll hopefully have another video in the morning, then we'll do a final thoughts later on for anything that I've not covered in this video, plus anything new from the press conferences as well. And of course, a deadline stream on Saturday. Otherwise, I'll leave it there. Give it a like, hit subscribe, and I'll catch you again soon.